Hello everybody, and you're very welcome back to the channel. So, hands up, be honest. Who ever heard of the Massey Ferguson Quattrino 4120 or the 4130? And I didn't hear much about this tractor until it was probably, I knew it existed probably about 10 years ago. I read a small article actually in a French magazine. There was a small article about it. I paid no attention to it. It was white in colour or cream in colour. It wasn't Massey Ferguson colour, and it was doing forestry works up. So I really didn't know much more about it until recently. A local Massey Ferguson dealer bought one, and my interest was sparked again. So in the last couple of weeks, maybe in the last month or two, I've been doing a little bit of fishing around, and I've been trying to find out a little bit about the Quattrino, and we will get into that now. First of all, welcome back to the channel, everybody, and to everybody who watched the video last week on the David Brown jump into case. Thank you very much to everybody who watched it, everybody who commented, and everybody who answered my request as to how many people were actually watching at that particular time. Was it 1, 2, 3 or 4? And I looked through all the comments, and we'd well over 100 comments, and a lot of people messaged me privately as well, text me and let me know. So it looked like, say, out of 1,000 views, there was actually 1,200 people watching it. So a factor of 1.2, and that's pretty good for someone like me, because when you take the demographic of the people that watch my videos, they are on the older side, whereas somebody like maybe Farmer Phil or some of those, it'd be on the younger side. So you might have 2 or 3 young lads watching together, a lot more families watching together, as opposed to people of an older generation who might be more interested in the videos. Please don't be insulted by that, but you know what I mean. People in their 40s, 50s and 60s, maybe 70s and 80s. I know there's guys in their 80s that are watching this and get good enjoyment out of it. But yeah, thanks very much to everybody who watched. So it was interesting to know that, and I might do it again sometime in the future with a different video, and we'll get a good balance of what the result is. So yeah, getting on to the Massey Ferguson Quattrino. Now, was it a Massey Ferguson? You could argue it was Massey Ferguson in, engine, cab, certain parts of the transmission were Massey Ferguson related. Where Massey Ferguson, Perkins, Massey Ferguson cab. This tractor was based on the 3120. So the 4120 Quattrino was based on what we would know as the 3120 Massey Ferguson. There was a higher horsepower model then as well. There was the 4135, I think it was, the Quattrino 4135. Now I don't know how many of these were made, but we'd imagine that was based on the Massey Ferguson 3120T, which would be the turbo version. Same engine, so the A6 354 engine that we're all very, very familiar with, that we've spoken about at length on this channel before. So looking at this tractor, it was probably the hardest tractor that I have ever researched, the hardest machine to try and get information on. This was like trying to find the Loch Ness Monster. It was just incredible to think that when you go onto YouTube and you put in, normally when you go into YouTube and you put in the name of a tractor or a machine or anything, you would always get a few thousand hits. But up until today, when you went on to YouTube and put in Massey Ferguson Quattrino 4120 or 4135, you got nothing, absolutely nothing. When you went on to Google and you searched it, you get some little bits and pieces. Now, there was an article done recently on another Irish publication company on a tractor that is in Ireland that I will speak about in a little while. A dealer in Ireland has one, and there was an article done on that, and that's what sparked my interest in it again. So I wanted to look into it, but incredibly hard tractor to find any information on. I have trawled the internet for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've been down the dark web in French chat rooms, French agricultural chat rooms, trying to translate French into English to try and get some sort of information. And I did get a little bit of information, and I got some technical specifications, and I did get messaging with an older gentleman who actually used to work in the factory when he was young enough. He was only like 20 or something, I think, when he worked in the factory. He wouldn't be that old now, I suppose, but he was messaging me. He gave me a little bit of information on it. He was only a very junior person when he was working there, but he gave me information on a little bit on the history of the tractor, and I contacted some of the suppliers that were supplying the axles. So Carro, they were the ones that supplied the axles for the chassis on this. There was a little bit of conflicting information as to was it them or wasn't, so I actually emailed their press office, and in fairness to them, they did get back to me just to confirm that yes, it was their axles. But I didn't get any much more information out of them than that. Massey Ferguson never got back to me, and the company that actually put this whole package together, so a company called Roux Industries in southern France, they are now defunct, that company, but they've amalgamated into another company. I sent them off a quick email and I got nothing back. So very, very hard to find. You will get pictures. There's a few pictures floating around here and there, and actually one of my regular viewers here, and a man that I know very well, when I did search this tractor, his Facebook page came up a little bit because he was chatting about one a few years ago, looking for a little bit of information or something as well. You know who you are. So I hope that you get a little bit more information out of this video than you did on your Facebook search a few years ago. So yeah, an interesting history to a certain degree. What's their value now? Well, they're rare. They're very, very rare. There was only about 22 of them made, from what I can gather. They weren't all branded Massey Ferguson for reasons I'll get into down the line. But it is believed that there's only about a half a dozen of them still actually in operation today, and there is, as I said, one of them in Ireland, and that is being restored back to Massey Ferguson colours, and 3-point linkage, and that has been put back onto it, and it seems like it will be put to demonstration work. It'll be put into a museum, because it probably will be the only functioning agricultural spec tractor that's left. The rest of them all nearly went off to forestry, and they were adapted for pipe laying and stuff like that, because when you look at the design of them, it is that track style tractor, like your fast tracks and your MB tracks. So we'll just go to the start. So look at the machine. It's not very familiar to fans in the rest of Europe, if only because a total of 22 units were made. So I'm just reading off my notes here. So it was intended originally to compete with the with the Mercedes-Benz MB track, or indeed take its place, I suppose, when it finished out, or the Deutz-Fahr in-track, which, let's face it, is a hideous looking thing. So with that mid-mounted cab, modern front rear hydraulics, but apparently within the design something went wrong along the way, and I can't find out exactly what, because there's very little information. There's no information out there, so it was never put into mass production. There was prototype models made, and there was demonstration models made, and they were put out there to public, and a couple of them were sold. So that's, that was it. It never went into mass production, but they are still out there, and they are a unique tractor. So the origins came from Massey Ferguson wanting to get into that market, that mid-mounted cab, all-wheel steer, all-wheel, basically all wheels the same size, that sort of a carrier type tractor with a platform on the back, the same as the MB track. It was introduced around 1990-91, this particular model, and as we know, the MB track was coming to the end of its days at that stage, and JCB were very heavily invested in their fast track, which was a completely new tractor from the ground up, and it obviously, from a technical point of view, was a far superior machine to this Massey Ferguson. And had that Massey Ferguson went into full production, it probably wouldn't have done very well, because JCB were so far ahead with their fast track. It was a far superior machine in pretty much all aspects. The Massey Ferguson was probably just half-arsed attempt to make something and see would it work. Initially, the first few of them were made was with a Massey Ferguson 60HX. So anyone that knows what that is, it's a backhoe loader, it's a Massey Ferguson backhoe loader. So what used to happen was they came from Massey Ferguson on a pallet basically, so they had no front axle on them. Basically all that came was the cab came separate, the engine and the transmission came separate on a pallet, and they were all put together. So then this company in the south of France, Roux Industries, had made the chassis. They had made the external hydraulics for it, and they had married it then to Carro axles. Now, I'm not quite sure at that stage were they Carro axles. I know some of the cab interior parts came from a Landini, the 10,000, and some of the drivetrain came from the Landini 10,000 as well. So the front axle on some of them came from a Landini 10,000, and this is coming from the guy that actually worked in the factory. So I know for a fact that that's true. So that's quite interesting when you look at it from that point of view. So the tractor had, as I said, all wheels the same size, all steerable. The Quattrino was based on, as we said, the MF 3120, and was accordingly powered with the 6-cylinder, 6-litre, 120 horsepower Perkins engine. And the example that I have shown here in the picture is believed to have been built in 1991. So the production went from, I think, 1990 to 1992. So it was a short enough run. And then the higher horsepower one, I'm not sure how many of them were made, so that would have been fitted with the turbo engine. So when you look at the name Quattrino, so obviously anyone that understands, any sort of European language will know that the word quat is 4, as in Audi Quattro. So 4-wheel steer, 4-wheel drive, and all 4 wheels the same size. That was their kind of slogan for it, for their advertising. But if you look up Quattrino, and it's quite interesting, if you look the word Quattrino in Italian, it means penniless or broke. So maybe this project was doomed from the start with its own name. Quattrino in Italian means penniless or broke. So as most people with that collect tractors, especially old vintage tractors, and they put every penny that they have into them, kind of stands to reason, all right. So the Quattrino, so look, it faced the same disadvantages as its German competitors, and the most significant of these was precisely its iconic wheels. The 4 identical sizes meant that fairly poor manoeuvrability, although they did have better traction. This is why Massey Ferguson decided on all 4 steerable wheels, which was not particularly new, but technically it was still quite difficult to implement at the time, and it was fitted with 18.4 by 30 wheels. So for a tractor like this, they were quite big wheels when you look at the wheels that were on the JCB, or even on the some of the similar sized MB tracks. So the Massey Ferguson Quattrino 4120 is not a model that many fans of the marque are familiar with, which is not to be judged too harshly, as no more than about 22 of them were made, as we said. It might even be asked whether it was a true Massey Ferguson at all, as the design and the construction was undertaken by another company completely, so Roux Industries, as we says, in Montagne in southern France. So they were the ones that were tasked with putting the chassis together, building the machine. They were supplied with the engine, so the skid pan, the engine, the transmission, and the cab to sit onto this chassis. So the basic construction then, so although the likes of the MB track had equal sized wheels all around, the basic problem with the arrangements remains, and that is that it restricts the front wheel lock and hence the turning circle of the vehicle. Smaller wheels give greater manoeuvrability but less traction, of course. Massey Ferguson sought to overcome this fundamental problem by steering all 4 wheels together, which was not a new concept, but it did require a system to control the turning of the wheels. So that was how one axle related to the other. So it was 4-wheel steer. It could be 4-wheel steer, it could be front axle steer, or it could be crab steer. So same as what you would have in your modern day telehandlers and stuff. They can crab steer. So from you look at the side, the chassis, has blanked off wheel arches, and that's one of the obvious modifications. The company opted for an early electronic system with several steering modes, enable it, as far as is known, to be front wheel steer, all wheel steer, or crab steer. The Quattrino chassis then. So if electronics had solved the problem of steering, they still had to deal with the problem of fitting the two steerable axles to the chassis. A rear bed or loading platform had to be designed, as did the incorporation of the 3-point linkage system. So when you look at the style of it, you look at the design, you look where the axles are in relation to where the engine and the transmission, so the transmission will be right underneath the cab. But the axles then are way down further. So typically with a normal tractor, you'd have drive coming through from the engine, through the transmission, and out the back end to the big differential that's in the axle at the back and out to the two wheels. But on this, because the axle was down so low, obvious modifications would have had to be made. So what they had was, at the back of the transmission, a big drop box that came down, very, very similar to what you'd have in the Massey Ferguson 1200, that anyone that has seen Massey Dave's videos on the 1200 rebuilding the drop boxes, out the back and straight down, and then you had one prop shaft going to the back axle and one prop shaft going forward then underneath the engine to the front axle. The hydraulic pumps and stuff then, they would have been independently driven externally, so there'd be external pumps with an external hydraulic reservoir implemented then into the 3-point linkage system that sat over the back axle. Now, I don't have too many pictures in this. I have a few little pictures there to show, but I don't have any specific details on the arrangement. But when I get to see this tractor, when I get to see the one that's been done up not far from where I am here, I'll talk about soon, I hope to get a better look and try to get a better understanding of exactly how the system worked, and hopefully get to have a little chat maybe with the guy that owns it, which would be great. I had thought about contacting him, but I just says no, maybe I'll leave it, and when they get their one restored, hopefully I can go down and see it in the museum, and we'll get a good look at it and good chat about it. So look at the frame then. So the strong frame was designed to support the whole skid unit, so the engine, the cab, the transmission and the hydraulic system. 2 carrow axles were then bolted to the underneath of the frame, and drive was delivered to the axles via a drop box from the transmission system, raising the overall height, and with large equal sized wheels matching the traction potential of the likes of your County or your Muirhill that we had spoken about. To provide the rear platform, the transmission was split near the gearbox, which had to be specifically constructed to accommodate a drop box to which the 2 drive shafts were attached, not unlike the system used, as we says, on the Massey Ferguson 1200. The 3-point linkage was then moved to the rear, allowing the likes of a sprayer or a fertilizer spreader, or a water tank or a fuel tank or anything to be mounted above the rear axle. And indeed, this is why a lot of these tractors became, when I say a lot, the few that were built had became popular with forestry guys, or with guys operating, they were putting cables down into it. It was an easy enough, it had a big frame, it was an easy enough tractor to mount stuff on the back of it, build frames around it for running pipes, running reels, running cables, and some of them had cranes mounted on the back of them, and some of them then had like a 5th wheel that you'd have in a truck that a timber trailer would hook onto for hauling timber and stuff out of woods. So altogether, the design, I suppose, has an air of hastily conceived conversion rather than a carefully thought out project. But any misgivings about the oddities are soon to be dispelled with the sound of the Perkins 6354 engine, straight 6, which rumbles along like any 654 or 6354 engine does. Very, very distinctive sound, and most people here that know Massey Ferguson are well used to the sound of it. So yeah, as I said, there is one here in Ireland, and the roots of this tractor, I believe, came from France. It was imported into Britain, and it was held in Britain by a collector, and and he sold it on then to make room for I suppose a few more tractors or whatever. So Joe Whelan, so of Whelan's Massey Ferguson dealers in Clare, down in Kilrush area. So he bought it, he has it, and Agriland, most Irish people are well familiar with Agriland. They were down looking at it, they done a little piece on it not too long ago, and that's where I seen it again. So I'm just going to read out a couple of little bits from the Agriland the Agriland piece on that. So the provenance of this particular tractor is somewhat hazy. It had at some point been converted to operate a trenching and cable laying implement and was probably used in France for that purpose, as a lot of them were. From France, it made its way across the channel to a UK collector who kept it for a couple of years before needing room for another tractor, and this is where Joe Whelan found it and brought it home to Kilrush in County Clare, where the family owns the local Massey Ferguson dealership. Now, most Massey Ferguson fans here are very familiar with Joe Whelan, and he has a fantastic Massey Ferguson museum that he has opened up. I'm very much looking forward to getting down to it. I have just been so busy, but I will, the first fine weekend that I have free, I'm going to get down and have a look at his museum and do a little video on it maybe when we're down there. So this particular tractor, the interior is a little bit faded and a little bit worn. The switching for the steering modes is mounted below the spool valve lever. The tractor is showing only 1,813 hours on the clock. Very possibly a genuine reading, as there appears to be very little wear on the controls or the seat. It is painted white because after Massey Ferguson pulled the plug on the Quattrino project, Rue Industry SA made a few more that were finished in this colour. So there were a few chassis that they had made. They had the skid plans there from Massey Ferguson, but Massey Ferguson pulled the pin on their end of it, and Rue Industries finished off the ones that they had there, and they painted them sort of a whitey creamish colour, and they sold them as a Valtrac. So the last few that were made were white and were called Valtrac, and most likely this is one of those tractors, and that's why it is that colour. A lot of them out there now that I've seen in forestry are green. Now, you know, I'm sure the logging companies, whoever owned them, probably sprayed them green themselves. But this particular one, the last few that were made were painted white, or sort of cream. Now, they don't look half as good as the Massey Ferguson colour ones, but they were called Valtrac. Now, I did have a little look into Valtrac, and I think it was just a brand name that they used. It was just a name they used. There is Valtrac out there that are an importer and distributor for Valtrac tractors in South Africa, but they only were established in 1997, so that was long after this tractor was about, so I don't think there's any relation there. I just think it was called a Valtrac, and the last few of them were sold on. So Joe Whelan, he now is thinking of changing it back, obviously, to the more lively Massey Ferguson colour, and giving it a full and proper restorative respray. The intention is to have it rejuvenated within the next few months, and we look forward to seeing it when it's all finished and it's running. And from what I have read, they have a good bit of work done on this tractor already. They've got the 3-point linkage working on the back. They've got the 4-wheel steer wasn't working. It's working again. So they are making progress with it, and it's starting to look good when it gets sprayed. And there's, I'd say, panels and stuff that are needed for it will probably have to be manufactured, because it's not you can go to a Massey Ferguson dealer and buy one off the shelf. So I got some information on the technical specs of this tractor. So I'm just going to take a read down through it. So when we look at the hydraulics, so on the hydraulic side, it obviously had electronic lift control, position sensing, descent speed control, flow position. So the maximum oil flow from the principal pump is 50 litres per minute at 180 bar, while the secondary pump delivered 29 litres per minute at 175 bar. So the frame is described as being a box beam with a floating engine assembly. The chassis is designed to measure with all Massey Ferguson experience. So whether Massey Ferguson, from that statement, whether they had input into the design of the chassis, I'm not sure, but maybe it's just a French translation. with all Massey Ferguson experience, the chassis was made to take this Massey Ferguson skip pan. So moving on then to the dimensions. So overall height of it is 3 meters. The overall width 2.5. Overall length 4.6 meters, and the wheelbase came in at 2.8 meters. Now, the reason obviously that these became popular with the logging industry or the forestry is there is great ground clearance on them, unlike the likes of the fast track and the MB track to a certain degree, because it has the bigger wheels and it has that lift, the sump, the engine, the cabin that is well up off the ground, and there is a little bit more protection on them. They probably are a little bit more robust for going over rough terrain. So the wheels and tyres then, as we said, are 18.4 by 30. The steering, 3 program selection, front wheel only, 4-wheel steer or crab steer, automatic disengagement over 14 kilometers an hour, 4-wheel drive engagement when braking, 4 equal wheels, 4-wheel drive, 4-wheel steer. Engine wise then, obviously the Perkins A6 354, normally aspirated 6 litre 120 horsepower, so that was in the 4120. So the 4135 then would have the A6 354 turbocharged. That would have been in the 3120T. So the transmission, on the transmission side, 16-speed gearbox with speed shift, 40 kilometers an hour was available, or said to be available as an option. It wasn't available in France for legal reasons. Self-locking differentials, basically all the stuff that you'd normally get with a standard tractor at that stage. PTO options then were 540 1000, economy mode, and PTO ground speed mode was an option as well. So ground speed mode, which are PTO. So that's the technical specs. So that's all I have on it. Really, I do hope to find out a little bit more down the line when I get down to see the one that is in Whelan's, and I will contact them, and I hope to get a chat with Joe Whelan or somebody down there that can shed a little bit more light on the tractor, or we can look a little bit closer at it, because I know there's not many people out there that know about these tractors. I'd say there's probably a lot of people in Ireland are probably familiar with it now because it showed up in Agriland, but the history of it, there's nothing out there in the history of it until now, of course. So if anybody wants to know any more, or if anybody knows any more, if anybody can shed any light, any more light on these machines, feel free to drop a comment in and let me know what you think. What you think of it. Yeah, look, it's an oddball machine. You can see why it didn't take off. JCB had the market nearly cornered, I suppose, with their fast track that was purpose built for what this machine was planned to do. And look, that was it. Just a very, very rare machine. I'd imagine it's a valuable machine because they are so rare. Is it a collector's item? Is there a demand? Do people want them? Well, Joe Whelan did anyway, and I suppose if he wants one, there's going to be more people wanting them now as well. So yeah, and if anybody sees one for sale anywhere, give me a shout. Yeah, so look guys, that's it. That's all I have. It took me 2 weeks to find all that information, and a lot of nights going through with Google Translate, translating from French to English. But look, that's it. I've done my best. Everybody have a great bank holiday weekend. I hope the weather is going to be good, and I will see everybody next week. And as always, thanks for watching.